My sister invited me to her baby shower under false pretenses, only to publicly announce that my late husband was the father of her child and demand half of my inheritance. In response, I revealed legal documents that left her pale and speechless. Now our parents are caught in the fallout, taking sides in a family battle I never saw coming. Life can change in a blink. One minute you're 32, happily married and excited about the future. The next, you're a widow, weighing cremation options because your husband's body was too damaged for an open casket. That was my reality 6 months ago when my husband James died in a car accident. I was overwhelmed by grief, struggling to find solid ground in a world that had suddenly shifted. The first few weeks were a haze of funeral arrangements, comforting phone calls, and sleepless nights. If my parents hadn't stepped in to manage most of the details, I don't know how I would have coped. "Karen, honey, we've handled everything with the funeral home," my mom had said in a gentler tone than I'd ever heard. "Just focus on yourself right now." Soon, the support group for those who lost loved ones became my lifeline. Every Tuesday evening, I'd sit in a circle with others who understood the emptiness in my chest. Some days were tougher than others. I remember whispering so quietly during one session that I almost couldn't be heard. Sometimes, I wake up and, for a split second, forget that he's gone. Maria, who lost her husband 2 years earlier, reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's normal, sweetie. Grief really comes in waves." As the months went by, I had to tackle practical matters. James had left me well provided for: a suburban house, a downtown apartment, and a decent bank account. I could have left my job at the marketing firm, but the thought of sitting alone all day in our empty house was too unsettling. So, I switched to part-time work just to keep busy. What surprised me most, however, was how my relationship with my parents changed. Growing up, I always felt like a backup plan compared to my younger sister, Sarah. They'd never miss Sarah's dance recitals or school plays, while my achievements barely earned a good job. Yet after James's death, something shifted. When they asked if I could help them out with a monthly $1,500 transfer, I agreed without hesitation. The weekly dinners at my parents' house turned into a comforting routine, Mom cooking her famous pot roast, Dad pouring wine, and us chatting about everything and nothing. For the first time, I felt like I truly had their attention. "Karen, tell us more about that new project at work," Dad would say, actually interested in my updates. I'd share how the marketing campaign was gaining traction, savoring these rare moments of connection. My boss even thought this might bring in several new clients. But everything changed the night Sarah joined us for dinner. My younger sister, 7 months pregnant, arrived with the kind of presence that instantly commandeered the room. Having been living in a rented apartment across town, I hadn't seen her since James's funeral. "Sarah, sweetie, sit here," Mom urged, practically pushing me aside to make room for her favorite daughter. "Do you need another pillow? Are your feet swollen?" In that instant, I felt invisible again, as if a switch had been flipped and all their attention was now solely on Sarah and her pregnancy. The old sting of being overlooked came rushing back. "Who's the father?" I asked during dinner, trying to be part of the conversation. "Have you told him about the baby?" Sarah's face darkened. "That's my business," she snapped, shoveling food around her plate. "I don't owe anyone details about my personal life." Mom immediately defended her. "Karen, don't pry, your sister doesn't have to explain everything." I couldn't help but notice how different that reaction was from when I was going through fertility treatments. Back then, they'd eagerly demand updates and offer unsolicited advice about my life. "How are you planning to handle everything on your own?" I pressed during another dinner as I watched her pile seconds onto her plate. "Babies are expensive," she waved her hand dismissively, that familiar smirk on her lips. "Don't worry about it, I've got everything under control." I should have paid closer attention to that sly smile. Sarah was always cooking up get-rich-quick schemes that never worked out: the organic smoothie business that fizzled in 2 weeks, the life coaching certification she never finished, and that cryptocurrency investment which cost her 3 months' rent. "Trust me," she said confidently, patting her belly as if her assurance should have set off warning bells. "Everything's going to go exactly as planned." Dad beamed at her as though she'd just announced a miracle. That's my girl, always landing on her feet. I took another bite of pot roast, trying to swallow down the familiar feeling of always being second best. Some things never change. Then one Tuesday morning, while I was at my desk reviewing marketing reports, my phone lit up with Sarah's name. I almost let it go to voicemail since our calls were usually brief and awkward, but something made me answer. "Karen," she said in that overly sweet tone reserved for when she needed something, "I'm having my baby shower next weekend at Mom and Dad's. I'd really love for you to come." Her invitation caught me off guard. The last real conversation we had was at James's funeral, and even then, she'd seemed distracted. "Are you sure?" I asked, surprised. I could count on one hand the number of times Sarah had ever included me in anything. Of course, she laughed, a laugh that felt forced. You're my only sister. It wouldn't be the same without you, plus I've got something special planned. Something in her tone tightened my stomach, but I brushed it aside. I'll be there, I promised, already thinking of gift ideas. Maybe this was her attempt to bridge the gap between us. The following Saturday, I arrived at my parents' house carrying 2 carefully wrapped packages, a high-end baby monitor and a handmade blanket. Despite our differences, these gifts were meant for my future niece or nephew. The house looked like a pastel explosion, pink and blue balloons, streamers hanging everywhere, and a towering diaper cake centerpiece. Only Sarah could turn it into such an event. It felt like half the town was there, Aunt Margaret with her daughters, Mom's bridge club friends lounging on the sofa, and Sarah's old college roommates clustered around the punch bowl, giggling over old stories. Then, Sarah announced it was time for games. She emerged through the crowd in a flowing maternity dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was glowing, yet there was a predatory edge to her smile that made me uneasy. Her eyes kept meeting mine across the room, holding my gaze just a beat too long. We played all the classic baby shower games, measuring Sarah's belly with string, guessing the baby's birth date, and that dreaded melted chocolate and diaper game. I even won the belly measuring contest, which seemed to irritate Sarah more than it should have. Throughout, she kept shooting me strange looks, as if she were waiting for something. After the gifts were opened, Sarah gathered everyone, commenting theatrically on each onesie and baby gadget. Then she approached me, holding up the blanket and running her fingers over its intricate pattern. Clinking her glass for attention, she silenced the room, and my heart began to race for no clear reason. I want to thank everyone for coming today, she began, one hand resting on her swollen belly, but there's something else I need to share. I think it's time everyone knew who the father of my baby is. My heart pounded as her eyes locked onto mine. I knew what was coming before she spoke, but nothing could lessen the blow. The father, she declared, her voice echoing in the suddenly silent room, is James Wilson, Karen's late husband. In that moment, the world tilted, and a deafening roar filled my ears. I could hear gasps and murmurs from the guests. Aunt Margaret's hand darted to her mouth while Sarah's college friends huddled together, whispering urgently. But what hurt most was the lack of shock on my parents' faces. They'd known all along, even before I could fully grasp what was happening. Before I could collect my thoughts, Sarah began speaking again, her tone thick with satisfaction as she fixed her gaze on me. Since James's baby is his only heir, I'm entitled to half of everything he left you, Karen, the house, the apartment, the money, and even his child's inheritance. The room spun. I gripped a chair's back to steady myself, but then Mom and Dad stepped forward, flanking Sarah like protective guards. Karen, Dad said in his stern, business-like voice, you need to do the right thing. Your nephew deserves his father's legacy. I managed a hoarse reply, you're lying, none of you are telling the truth. James would never, oh no. Sarah's smile turned cruel as she pulled out her phone. Then how do you explain these? She asked, holding up the screen. My world shattered as I saw them, James and Sarah, entwined in each other's arms, kissing in what looked like a hotel room. Another picture showed them holding hands at a restaurant I didn't even recognize. He loved me, Sarah declared, her voice echoing across the silent room. He was planning to leave you for me. We were going to tell everyone, but then he had that accident, and all our plans fell apart. I couldn't breathe or think as my body moved on autopilot. I grabbed my purse, pushed past the murmuring guests, and stumbled out to my car. I heard Mom calling after me, but I was already reversing out of the driveway. The drive home was a blur as my mind repeatedly replayed those photos, trying to make sense of them. The restaurant pictures must have been taken during one of his so-called business lunches, and the hotel shot during one of his frequent work trips. As soon as I walked through the front door, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Sarah was sending a barrage of messages. I don't love her anymore. I haven't for a long time. We'll tell everyone after the divorce. You're the only one I want to be with. I can't wait to start our life together. Each new message felt like another fresh stab to my heart. The timestamps revealed conversations stretching back months. While I was enduring fertility treatments, convinced I was the problem in our marriage, my husband and my own sister were busy planning their future together. I spent that night pacing the house, handling James's things, and wondering if everything in our life had been a lie. The first call from my parents came at 7 a.m. sharp. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Karen, you need to be reasonable about this, Dad began without a proper greeting. The sooner you agree to split the inheritance, the easier this will be for everyone. His casual arrogance made my blood boil. Easier for whom? For Sarah? For you? For all of us? Mom chimed in over speakerphone. You don't want this to get messy, dear. When I asked in a near whisper, when did you know about them, there was a pause, a hesitation that said more than words. We've known for a while, Karen, Mom finally admitted. James told us about 6 months ago, well before the accident. That timeline hit me like a blow. I couldn't believe they'd known for 6 months and still allowed me to weep on their shoulders at his funeral, even accepting my money every month while fully aware of what he and Sarah had done. Traitors, the words slipped out cold and final. All of you. I hung up and blocked their numbers. My hands trembled as I opened my banking app, but I didn't hesitate to cancel the monthly transfer to their account. Let them beg their precious Sarah for money. 2 weeks passed in a fog of missed calls and unanswered texts. Then came Sarah's email. She'd sue me if I didn't voluntarily give up half of everything. The word voluntarily had never felt so much like a curse. I couldn't bear to reply, couldn't bear to think about James's betrayal or how many people must have seen them together while I remained clueless. At work, the whispers became unbearable, pitying looks from some colleagues and barely hidden smirks from others. Tom, my boss and one of the few real friends I had left, called me into his office after I broke down in the middle of a client meeting. Take some time off, he said gently. Paid or unpaid, whatever works for you. Your job will be here when you're ready to return. I nodded, gathered my things, and left that day. The next few weeks merged into one long, lonely stretch as I became a recluse in my own home. I had groceries delivered, ignored the doorbell when it rang, and spent hours poring over old photos, trying to spot the signs I'd missed. Every happy memory now felt like a cruel joke, each moment of our marriage tainted by the knowledge that he'd been living a double life with my own sister. Then Facebook delivered another shock. Sarah had given birth to a boy. The photo showed her glowing in a hospital bed with our parents proudly hovering over their new grandson. The baby was swaddled in the cream-colored blanket I had knitted for the shower, a deliberate jab, it felt. I closed the app before reading the comments, but not before noticing she had named him James Jr. A week later, a court summons arrived in a thick manila envelope. My hand shook as I opened it, already knowing what I'd find inside. Sarah was suing for half of everything James had left me, claiming her son's right to his father's inheritance. The legal language was cold and precise, laying out her demands in stark black and white: the house, half the money, and partial ownership of the downtown apartment. I spent 3 days researching lawyers before settling on Richard Martinez, who came highly recommended for handling complex inheritance cases. Miss Wilson, he said while shuffling through the papers on his desk with a neutral expression, I have to be honest with you, your sister has compelling evidence of a long-term relationship with your late husband, text messages, photos, witness statements, even from your own parents. He paused to adjust his wire-rimmed glasses. In cases like this, proof of an intimate relationship combined with a biological child usually sways the courts. I was still processing the devastation when my phone rang that evening from an unknown number. Hello, is this Karen Wilson? A woman asked. Her voice was unfamiliar but carried a cadence that made my heart skip a beat. I'm Elizabeth Parker, James's mother. The world tilted sideways. I gripped the kitchen counter for support. That's impossible, I whispered. James was an orphan, he said. His parents died when he was young. He grew up in foster care. Another one of his lies, I'm afraid. Her tone was bitter but not unkind. Would you be willing to meet with me? There are things you need to know, things that might help you. We arranged to meet at a small downtown cafe the next morning, a neutral spot. I arrived early, my stomach in knots, and ordered a coffee I barely managed to sip. I nearly dropped the cup when she walked in. The resemblance was uncanny. She had his eyes, his smile, even the fluid grace in her movements that I had always admired. I was at the funeral, she said after we settled into a secluded booth in the back, away from prying ears. I couldn't bring myself to approach you then because James and I hadn't spoken in years. Suddenly, I remembered her, the solitary figure who had slipped out before the service ended. I had been too wrapped up in my own grief to notice who she was, but now the memory crystallized, the elegant woman in black standing apart from the other mourners, her face hidden behind a dark veil. Why are you coming forward now? I asked, trying to keep the suspicion out of my voice. After everything I'd learned about James, it was hard to trust anyone. Anything or anyone associated with him. Elizabeth reached into her purse and withdrew a weathered manila envelope, its edges frayed as if it had traveled countless hands over the years. I know what your sister is alleging, and despite everything, I won't let another woman be hurt by my son's deception, she said. Her fingers trembled as she slid the envelope across the table. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, Elizabeth had enclosed medical records from Boston General Hospital, dated a decade ago, roughly a year before James and I were married. My eyes raced over the pages, and I felt my blood run cold. The words azoospermia, permanently sterile, and no chance of natural conception leaped off the paper, each term a new shock. Elizabeth explained softly, James had these tests when he was 25. The results shattered him. It was one of the final topics we discussed before our falling out. I couldn't speak as memories of endless fertility treatments, relentless doctor visits, hormone injections, and the bitter mix of tears and self-blame flooded back. Everything had been an elaborate lie. The courtroom teemed with people on the day of the hearing. In the front row, Sarah cradled baby James Jr., flanked by her parents who looked ready to defend her at any cost. Dressed as the epitome of a grieving widow in a modest black dress, her minimal makeup and practiced sorrowful expression worked perfectly when she took the stand. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she recounted her deep love for James. "All I want is what's right for my son," she declared, her voice cracking. "He deserves his father's legacy." My lawyer, Mr. Martinez, waited until she finished before approaching the bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that exposes Miss Thompson's claims as fraudulent." He presented the hospital records. The judge inspected the documents, her expression unreadable. Sarah's lawyer leaped to object over the chain of custody and document authenticity. "These records are fake," Sarah shrieked, clutching the baby tighter. "She forged them to steal my child's inheritance." Mr. Martinez calmly replied, "Since these records prove Mr. Wilson was sterile, we request a DNA test to confirm paternity." A smug smile played on Sarah's face as she retorted, "That's impossible. James was an orphan, his body was cremated, there's no one left to test against." With a light-hearted tone, Mr. Martinez added, "May I present Elizabeth Parker, James Wilson's biological mother?" Elizabeth stood, and a murmur ran through the courtroom. I could see Sarah's face blanch as Elizabeth spoke clearly, "I'm ready to undergo a DNA test to see if this child is my grandson." The judge nodded, "DNA testing is ordered. We will reconvene when results are available." Sarah slumped in her seat, her face drained of color. Our mother rushed over, shooting me a look filled with venom. Yet for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. The courtroom fell silent as the judge opened the envelope containing the DNA test results. Sarah sat rigidly, the baby sleeping peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him. The judge announced in a clear, firm tone, "The results conclusively show there is no genetic link between the child and Mrs. Elizabeth Parker, thus, it is determined that James Wilson is not the father." A collective gasp swept through the room. Sarah's face crumpled as mascara streamed down her cheeks. "Miss Thompson, can you explain why you deceived the court?" the judge demanded sternly. With the baby clutched close, Sarah murmured, "I was involved with several men after James died and was cremated. I thought no one would ever know about his money, and I needed it." The judge pressed, "So you attempted to defraud your own sister? You even used your parents as unwitting accomplices?" "I just wanted security for my baby," Sarah whimpered, her plea falling flat. Even our parents looked stunned, finally grasping the full extent of her lies. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. This court rules in favor of the defendant, Karen Wilson. All of Sarah Thompson's claims to James Wilson's estate are dismissed with prejudice. Miss Thompson, consider yourself fortunate that Mrs. Wilson has not pressed criminal charges for attempted fraud. Outside the courthouse, my parents approached me. "Karen, we had no idea Sarah was lying," my mom cried, while my dad looked more aged than ever. "We can fix this. We were struggling ever since the monthly transfers stopped." I raised my hand. "No, just stop." I blocked their numbers on my phone and walked away without a glance back. Elizabeth was waiting by my car. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. I surprised myself with a laugh. "You know, I think I actually am, or at least, I will be." I took a deep breath. "I've been mulling over that downtown apartment James left me. I never liked it, too many memories. But maybe you'd like it." Her eyes widened. "Karen, no, I couldn't possibly," I insisted. "You gave me back my life with those medical records. Let me offer you something in return." I handed her the keys. A week later, through tears, she whispered, "I never thought I'd have a daughter," as she hugged me. That was 3 months ago. My family still reaches out via distant relatives and mutual friends, but I've cut those ties. Sarah sent a letter claiming she's changed, apologizing and asking for help with the baby. I tossed it aside, unopened. Instead, I now enjoy weekly dinners with Elizabeth. We share stories about James, the good times and the bad. She's helping me understand that while he wasn't the man I believed him to be, it doesn't erase all the joyful moments we once shared. Yesterday, I finally packed away James's remaining belongings. With Elizabeth's help, we donated some items to charity and stored others in the attic. As we worked, she reminisced about James as a little boy, before the lies took over. Somehow, it was comforting to know that part of him still existed. I'm not ready to date yet, but I'm beginning to live again. I've returned to full-time work, joined a hiking club, and I'm planning my first solo vacation. Sometimes, when I glance in the mirror, I barely recognize the woman staring back at me. Life has a funny way of surprising you. I lost the family I was born into but gained one I never expected. It's not the life I once imagined, but perhaps it's the one I was always meant to have.